Welcome to Westminster Watch, and I'm Nick de Bois. On this week's show, we've got another instalment of our Life in Politics series, where we delve into the careers of those who've been at the heart of British political life. This week, I'll be speaking to Lord Graham Brady. It's one of his first appearances since standing down as an MP and taking up a peerage in the House of Lords. Up until the election, he was quite possibly the most powerful man you'd never heard of. That's because for most of the past decade and a half, rather than being on the front benches, he controlled the Conservative Party's backbench MPs. Brady was the man who told prime ministers when to go and organised the contests for their replacements, overseeing 5 premiers in total. After 14 years of keeping a low profile, the former kingmaker is now free to lift the lid of the secrets, the lies, and the truth about 5 prime ministers, which is what he plans to do in his book of the same name, being released later this year. Lord Brady, thanks for joining us here. So I am compelled to ask you this very straightforward question. What is it like to tell a prime minister that their time is up?
Well, it varies. Obviously, I did it more than once with more than one prime minister, and the circumstances can be very, very different. And with Theresa May, for instance, we were really working very hard to try to allow her to make a decision so that she could leave with some dignity. With Boris Johnson, I told him what I thought. He told me that he didn't agree and he was going to carry on. And then the next morning phoned me to say he'd reconsidered and he was going to resign that day. With Liz Truss, of course, things just disintegrated so suddenly and rapidly that it was a very different matter. And I said that I thought things were irretrievable, and she said she agreed.
We'll come to that more. But when you go in there, are you to speak to the Prime Minister of the day and give notice to them? Do you have the party's interests foremost in your mind, or the country's?
Obviously, both are there. I think the national interest is obviously going to be the most important thing. But my position as chairman of the 1922 Committee was a Conservative Party position, so obviously also bearing that very firmly in mind. Also a difficult balance between what my sense was of the party's position and my own feelings and my own views about a particular individual.
Well, you preempted me. We'll come on to that. But I have to ask you, you have presided uniquely in your 14-year term over 5 prime ministers. Over the last 5 years in particular, their fate has been decided by only 15% of parliamentary colleagues, MPs, if you like, determining whether they have to face a confidence vote or not. Don't you think that the record of such change of prime ministers in such times suggests that rules should be changed?
Well, the prime ministers didn't go because of that rule, and they didn't go because of confidence votes taking place. Of course, David Cameron walked away the morning after the EU referendum. I was actually live on the BBC at the time saying how important it was that he should stay. Then we had a confidence vote on Theresa May, but that was in December 2018, and she didn't go until May, June.
But it is a sword of Damocles hanging over every party leader, and in this case, prime minister's head.
It is a sword of Damocles that hangs there. What I would say, though, from my experience of it, is that whereas the public and the media tend to assume that Conservative MPs are trigger-happy and are just desperate to dash off a letter calling for a confidence vote as soon as a new leader is installed, actually, they're very, very reluctant and take it extremely seriously. So it's been in quite extreme circumstances that the dam has been breached, and we've seen the 15% achieved and a confidence vote taking place.
And those letters sit in your safe. You've always said you've never, ever shared, even with your closest colleagues in the 1922, how many letters they are. Can you put your hand on your heart now and say you never shared it with anyone?
Absolutely,
How many?
absolutely. What I do in the book, published on the 26th of September.
Kingmaker.
Kingmaker, thank you. What I do in the book, I respect the confidence of individual colleagues who wrote but didn't themselves go public about it. But I do set out in some instances the numbers, the flow of the numbers, how circumstances changed and how the number of colleagues writing letters increased or fell.
What's the quickest of all those prime ministers that you received a letter demanding the new prime minister relatively should go?
I think.
Are we talking days, weeks?
Days.
Days of someone being.
Yes.
Would you say who?
No, I won't. But I'd say it's a very rare thing and very small numbers. And I guess there are just instances where a particular parliamentary colleague might have a particular relationship with a leader or an experience of dealing with them that makes them completely convinced from the outset that they are the wrong person to do the job.
Out of all the prime ministers that you've been engaged with since being chairman of the 1922, who had the most respect, do you think, for you and not you as a person, but the 1922 committee and your role, and who had the least respect?
I think Theresa May probably had the most respect for the office and for the role, and as in everything, she conducted herself with complete propriety throughout. I think it always struck me the change in the body language between dealing with David Cameron, who would frequently have his shoes off and his feet up on the table and his hands behind his head as he conducted his meetings. And then Theresa May took over and it was tea and bone china cups with saucers.
All right, now let's talk about David Cameron, because he's the one you never said, as you freely acknowledged yourself, that you never had to visit him and tell him to go. How was his relationship? Did you feel he actually ever listened to you?
Well, I say in the book, actually, there was a point where I started to think he quite enjoyed our meetings, but started to enjoy them more as a sort of 20-minute oasis of calm during a busy day. And the one thing he would always say as a compliment to me was that whatever we discussed never became public. So I think it was quite a rare thing, and obviously very important with all of the prime ministers I dealt with, that I didn't then go and leak what they'd said or what our conversation had been.
You've said you were surprised when he resigned, but what led to his resignation, of course, was Brexit. The backbenchers and the 1922 committee were pushing very hard in that 2010-2015 term of David Cameron's for a referendum. Do you have any regrets about that now you look back at the disorder and disunity and chaos it caused the Conservative Party, the outcome of the referendum?
I don't regret it. I don't regret that it happened. What I think is unfortunate is that because of the coalition government being formed, we were not in a position to seek a proper reform of our relationship with the EU. And when I was Shadow Europe Minister many years ago, our policy was to seek an incremental return of competencies from the EU to UK control. And it's a perverse thing that because we had a coalition with the Liberal Democrats, they wouldn't countenance any negotiations to try to return powers. And therefore the pressure built up. And it came to the point where only promising a future referendum could be the
And
answer.
did you drag him to call that referendum by the weight of parliamentary support for it? Or do you think he got there and believed it was the right thing to do?
I think that he probably suspected that we would have another coalition government and he wouldn't be in a position to deliver the referendum. But it was something that could be promised for a general election campaign and for a future parliament, which sought to defer the moment of truth. But actually, personally, I was prepared to wait to see whether he achieved what he said he was going to seek, which was a, quote, profoundly different relationship with the European Union for Britain. And of course, he came back with very, very little.
Very thin. Let's move on to Theresa May. She won the support of the members when she took over from David Cameron. On reflection, was she the right choice?
Clearly, it didn't work. And I think with the benefit of hindsight, it's possible to go and look at all these political careers and make a judgment on that basis. I think at the time, the members were keen to have somebody who was experienced, and she'd been Home Secretary for a long period of time. They were keen to have somebody who seemed steady and calm and could give them some reassurance, as indeed for the country, that through the turbulence we were going to face in leaving the EU, we would have that calm, steady leadership. And certainly...
Strong and stable.
Strong and stable, indeed. And at the time, whilst I'd never said who I was going to vote for, I did consult the 500 or so members of my own Conservative Association in Altrincham and Sale, and it came back, the 150 or so who replied were 75% for Theresa May. And I think part of the appeal was that she'd been a quiet Remainer who then made it clear she was going to accept the verdict of the British people in the referendum.
So you clearly sound like you have a lot of respect for Theresa May, for, of course, many roles she did prior to becoming Prime Minister. What was it personally like for you to tell her it was time to go?
Well, it was difficult, and I think it was difficult especially at the beginning, because I think at first she took it rather personally and thought that it was a message from me. And of course, I was there as a messenger on behalf of the parliamentary
she
party.
saw this as just Graham Brady telling her to go.
I think there was an element of that at the outset. By the end, I think she understood that I was doing my job. But it's a painful thing when somebody, especially I think Theresa put everything into the job, but she simply was not able to deliver a Brexit deal, a withdrawal agreement, that could achieve majority support in the House of Commons. And of course, it was my amendment, which was the only positive proposition.
Your amendment to what was the proposal for a Brexit deal?
Indeed, to take away the political declaration and to recommend alternative arrangements at the Irish border, which of course was the sticking point that became so
toxic,
neuralgic for so long.
Moving on to Boris Johnson. I mean, hugely popular with the members. What was he like to work with?
I think at the outset, his inclination was probably not to work with us at all. He was, he thought he had a personal mandate. He ran his own.
Was that even before his election success in 2019?
I think even before that, it was fairly difficult to get access to him at first. And then, of course, very soon after that 2019 election success, we then were into the challenges of COVID and the what I thought and believe very strongly was a mistake, the repeated pattern of lockdowns.
You were directly opposed to the policies of his government when it came to lockdown. You were on record on that. Do you think, was it your long-held views and consistent views on lockdown and being a sceptic of it that drove the reports that we got that Boris Johnson reportedly was told, don't meet with Graham Brady?
Well, it was never meet Graham Brady alone, which I must say,
and you believe that?
I think that there was, I think there is always a tendency with number 10 advisors to want to hold on to their own access. And I think in many ways is one of the really important things about the role of chairman of the 1922 committee is you are the one advisor to a prime minister or a leader of the party whom that prime minister has not chosen. So they have no choice but to deal with the chairman of the 22. And it's a good idea to develop a good working relationship quickly.
Do many prime ministers, or do all of your prime ministers, shall we call them, do they see the 1922 as the enemy?
I think it's a huge mistake if they do.
Did some of them,
I
in
think
your opinion?
At times they probably did.
David Cameron?
David Cameron, of course, tried to change the 1922 committee, as you remember very well, and was stopped because he didn't have any locus to be involved, not even a member of the 1922 committee as the leader of the party. So I think they do sometimes make the mistake of seeing it as the enemy. Actually, of course, it is their immediate electorate. And they really need to work with the 1922 committee. And they ought to recognise as well the fundamental starting belief and desire of the members of the committee, of the Conservative Parliamentary Party, is to see Conservative governments and see Conservative governments succeeding. So whilst we may sometimes differ about the route that should be taken, we share an objective.
Let's talk about Liz Truss. She wasn't the choice of MPs in the vote, the last vote between her and then Rishi Sunak, of course, who was runner-up, but she was the members' choice. Do you think that the process of choosing a leader should be improved, some would say, or changed to the point maybe the members don't have a say?
Well, I've said before that in my view, it's a mistake when the party is in government for the final decision to be taken by the members. I've also said that's not going to change. And the reason it's not going to change is it's enshrined in the constitution of the Conservative Party, and you would need a supermajority of the people representing the members to make that decision and approve the change. So we have to live with a world in which the final choice is made by the members, as long as there are, as long as there's more than one candidate put forward, then there will be an election for the members to vote in. What the conclusion that I came to, what I think is essential, is that at the end of the parliamentary rounds of voting, there should be a further indicative ballot. So the parliamentary party should express its preference between the final two candidates. And it, of course, doesn't mean that the members would necessarily come to the same conclusion, but if they came to a different conclusion, they would do so in the full knowledge of what the views of the parliamentary party would be.
So some people will remember what was quite chaotic scenes in the last days of her premiership. How did you approach the process of removing Liz Truss as Prime Minister, basically so soon after she was chosen by the members?
Well, the first thing that I would say is that whereas some people said, oh, the members of Parliament never wanted her, they were going to get rid of her one way or another, not my experience at all. I think that the really strong view of colleagues was we couldn't go through another leadership election. We had to make it
So
work.
you weren't being egged on, as it was?
No, I think, of course, it was a very short period, but colleagues wanted to pull together behind her and try to make it work. The point where it became completely unsustainable and very quickly was all over very chaotic scenes in the House of Commons, where the government changed its position on an opposition day motion, something not that important in itself, but had started the day saying it would be treated as a matter of confidence, that Conservative MPs who voted with the Labour Party on fracking would lose the Conservative whip. And then by the time the ministers were winding up the debate, that position had changed, which led to the resignation of the Chief Whip and the Deputy
Were you
Chief
being
Whip.
inundated at that point, or was it already out of control beyond repair?
It was, my view, I think things had become untenable, but I think it was going to take much longer to come to an end. But when that episode unfolded and we had the Chief Whip and the Deputy Chief Whip resigning, we had chaotic scenes in the division lobbies, it just became obvious that...
Did you go and see her immediately to convey...
I didn't go to see her immediately, and I suppose that there were two key things that day. One was that I had seen her earlier in the day, and my advice very strongly was that the opposition day vote should not be made a matter of confidence. And I said to her that given the strength of feeling on the issue, it was quite likely that she was going to lose quite a lot of Conservative MPs who would actually end up whipless. And it might, instead of making her look strong, it might have ended up making her look a lot weaker. So that was my advice. She took that advice. It may have come from other people as well. And the vote was not treated as a matter of confidence, but that did then lead to these chaotic scenes. Slightly bizarrely, a number of us were going on straight from the House of Commons that night to a dinner at the Carlton Club, which was marking the centenary of the Carlton Club meeting, which brought an end to the Lloyd George coalition in 1922, which is often wrongly conflated with the foundation of the 1922 committee. But I was going to be one of the speakers there. And it was very obvious going into that very large assembly of Conservative Party members and supporters that the atmosphere was pretty tense.
And that's what prompted you then?
I thought about it overnight. I got up the next morning. I was literally reaching for my phone to call and ask for a meeting when I got a call saying the Prime Minister would like to see you. So it was a much less painful episode than it might have been. I went in to see her. We had a very brief conversation. She asked me how bad I thought it was. I said I thought it was very bad. She asked me if I thought it was retrievable. I said I was afraid I didn't think it was. And she said she'd reached the same conclusion. So I then, having had some experience of these episodes, knowing there were going to be 100, 200 members of the media outside in Downing Street, I said either I need a car now to take me back to the Palace of Westminster, or if you prefer, I'm happy to stay here in the building until you've made your statement. Which she said, well, we'll do that. We'll keep you hostage here.
So you were held in the office of number 10 while she resigned?
They found me a spare office and a phone charger and a mug of tea and a tuna sandwich from the canteen. And I sat watching the rolling news coverage, following on my phone everything that was going on social media. I was amused to see the main commentary was that Graham Brady has been in a meeting with the Prime Minister for over 2 hours now. The meeting has been joined by the Chief Whip, the party chairman, the Leader of the House. All this going on while I'm watching the television in a spare office.
Rishi Sunak, what was your relationship like with him?
Always very good. And I think Rishi...
They say he doesn't listen. Did he listen to you?
I think there is a very fair case to be made for that. And one of the
Did that frustrate you?
Yes, but I think with Rishi's time, which was obviously, again, it was a very short period, and there was a challenge, and I fully accepted this. The first part of that period had to be about reasserting stability and calm and order and rebuilding a reputation for competence. So there was a very strong case for the first part of his tenure for doing very little, just restoring order. And I think the tension that was obvious to many of us, and I'm sure it was obvious to him as well, was that there had to come a point where the government would take some risks, do some things which were political. And it was deciding the point of transition, which was the frustration.
When he called the snap election, am I right, first of all, in thinking you had no idea that was coming? But secondly, did you then convey to him how disappointed so many MPs were with what they saw as a reckless move?
I'd already advised him that I thought a October or November election was the sensible thing to do. I'd met him with the executive in the 1922 committee, and we'd had a very full discussion of the timing of an election. I have to say views on the executive were various, and there were those who thought we should go early, but the majority view was that a later election would be sensible. When the election was called, he telephoned me at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, so I had some advance knowledge. Crucially, I didn't go to a betting shop, but he told me then that he'd already seen the King. And so the dissolution had been granted. And there was really very little point then in putting the case for changing the date.
You're not there now, you're in the House of Lords. Congratulations on that. But let me ask you, the future of the Conservative Party, have you decided who to back?
No, I haven't. And I think given that we are in the midst of this rather long leadership election, I think that's okay because we are in opposition. We've got the luxury of spending some time letting the members have a really good look at the candidates. Then I think I might take advantage of that opportunity as well.
Do you think that the talk now of reforming the Conservative Party is a central issue, or is that just playing to the membership? Do you want to see people setting out what they believe and stand for? Isn't that the future of the Conservative Party?
You'd be unsurprised to hear, Nick. I completely agree with you.
And do you think
that.
they're doing it?
I think that the candidates are having those conversations. They are making that case. I think it's very important to do that. My sense in politics now for a long time, and I was in the House of Commons for 27 years, first elected in that Blair landslide in 1997. And I think the huge frustration the public has had with politics has been too little belief, too little conviction, too much focus group-driven government. So I think there is a real hunger for belief and conviction.
Well, final question for you, if I may. Your successor, as chair of the 1922. Is he going to have an easier time than you?
Well, I very much hope so. I think Bob Blackman will do a great job. I think he was an officer of the 22 alongside me for a long period of time and through some of the most tumultuous times. So he will have gained a lot of experience of that. I think necessarily being in opposition is going to be an easier and a quieter period than we had through a very tumultuous period in government.
So we may only have 2 or 3 new leaders of the Conservative Party whilst in opposition. Lord Brady, thank you very much indeed for joining me today. And your book, Kingmaker, comes out very soon and will be in all good bookshops, I'm sure. Thanks to you for joining me, along with my guest, Lord Brady. And don't forget to subscribe to the TRT World YouTube channel for more lively debate and conversation. But for now, from me and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.